person that's been nice to us today and been a teacher in the Granger County education system for a long time. And this time, Mr. Woodbarger, in filming and making this film, a lot of people has told me how much time and effort that your father had spent on the history of Rutledge and working on things and give a lot of his life to doing that. So if you don't care, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about him, because I think he deserves the respect of us mentioning anything when we're doing something about the history of Rutledge.
Well, my father, W. Holt, has done a lot of work, research work on Granger County. He loved history, and during the bicentennial, he wrote a book on Granger County, and he also helped to compile the Granger County book for the bicentennial. This book can be purchased at the county judge office if anyone's interested.
Okay, would you go into some of the history of when the city of Rutledge was established?
Okay, the act that created Granger County was passed on April the 26th, 1796, and this was 9 days before Tennessee became a state. And the county was named for Mary Granger, who was the daughter of Colonel Caleb Granger of Wilmington, North Carolina. She married William Blount, of course, who was the governor of Tennessee, and the county was named after Mary Granger. Now, Rutledge was not, the site for Rutledge was not established until 1801, which was 5 years after the county became a county. It seems that they had a little difficulty deciding on the site. The first set of commissioners couldn't agree on the site. The second set of commissioners couldn't agree on the site. So it took 5 years before they could decide on the site for the county seat. And it was named Rutledge in honor of Colonel George Rutledge, who succeeded John Sevier as Brigadier General. The site that they first selected was just 22 3/4 acres. And as you know, Rutledge has always been very small. In the 1830 census was 150 people. In 1880, the census was just 126 people. And it said that Rutledge was described as having one church, one school, 3 stores, 2 taverns, 2 blacksmith shops, 2 hatters, 1 saddler, and 2 tanners. The first merchants that were issued license in Rutledge were the Montgomery and Company, and this was in 1803. And Granger County has had some newspapers, some early newspapers, one of them being the Enterprise and the other one the Tennessee Eagle, but these were of short duration.
Very interesting about the early establishment of Rutledge. I understand that you also have some information about the schools and churches in early Rutledge.
Okay, the first school was probably the Madison Academy, and it was put in operation in 1842. The first building was on the bluff just south of Rutledge, but this building burned in 1880, and in 1885 a new building was built, which was just east of the Masonic Hall, and also a dormitory was built behind the school, and the tuition was $40 per term. In 1921, a new building was built, and this housed the Rutledge Grammar School and the first high school, which was known as Granger County High School. And this was in 1921, and in 1923, the first graduated, and there was only 6 members. And of course, in 1932, a new high school was built in Rutledge. Still stands, but in 1968, a new high school was built.
Yeah, I can remember running the halls and that a few times myself.
I can remember playing
Yeah.
in the when they were building the one in 1932.
Okay, Miss Smith, go ahead there.
This is an old picture of the heart of Rutledge along in the early 20s, before the road was even blacktop, old gravel road all the way through to Knoxville. This little building here is an old cafe owned by a fellow named Waller. The old Smith drugstore was in this building, part of this building here. Mr. W.B. Talley had a general merchandise store in this part of the building. And the 92 highway goes down to the side of the bank building. It's still there to Jefferson City. There's a building here that was one time a grocery store and later torn down and a small shoe store put in it. This building here is still standing. That's Jarnigan Motor Company that burned in the 50s. And on out the other side of there is a hotel that's there now. The old hotel burned in the 20s.
That's a good picture. And you're on a gravel road there.
That's right. Gravel road all the way to Knoxville. And my grandfather ran the old hotel that burned way out on that end of town. And people would drive out of Knoxville on Sunday evening and come up and eat in that hotel building. And he had one long table. And I never did know how much he charged, but you went down there and the basement floor had 3 floors to the hotel. And they'd serve you old style country cooking, cornbread and chicken and ham and biscuits and green beans and all those things, and he'd beg them to eat some more, and he'd fill the town full of people on Sunday afternoon out of Knoxville that drove up here on a gravel road.
He's looking for that good country food, wasn't
That's right.
he? Okay.
And Shepherd's Inn over at Dandridge was the other good place in East Tennessee at that time to eat.
Motel here.
This building here belonged to my grandfather, and I'm not sure of the dates that it was built, but you can tell it was in service before the road was even had any gravels on it at all. And it burned, I think, in the middle 20s. Grandfather had 13 children, and my father was the oldest of the 13. And this particular road from Middle Tennessee to Washington was through Granger County, and many prominent men like Andrew Johnson, Andrew Jackson, those people would stop at several places along this highway going to Washington, and would often stop in this particular hotel. Large hotel, had about 20 rooms in it. The dining room was downstairs, and they fed many people coming out of Knoxville on Sunday afternoon for their evening meal. Had a real fine business there until it burned and was totally destroyed.
Mr. Smith, I understand this is the second courthouse here. Would you like to talk about that a little bit? It's a beautiful building.
Yes, sir. This building was built in the late 1800s, and you can tell by the picture that the architecture was almost better than anything you see today, and it had a lot of good foundation around the bottom, made from cut stone by hand, about 3 feet long, about 12 inches thick, and 18 inches wide, all hand cut all the way around it. Marble hand done. The bottom floor had a marble floor in it, but all the top floor in the courtroom upstairs was wooden. The roof was made from slate, and it burned several hours before the fire came through. And when it did come through, it burned very quickly. I was the first person there, and was able to get in this room here. W.I. Daniel was county court clerk. He got most of his things out of that room. It was a very fine building, and would be a a building for many people to come and visit and enjoy even if it was here today. This is the best picture that I've been able to get of it after searching for a long time.
Appreciate y'all inviting me down here. Y'all done a good job.
Well, I just like to go home. Kathleen, I'm so glad you could come out. We just hunted. Well, that's wonderful. Well, I hunted Mary Granger. You look good.
Got you a little time off from work.
Love her to be here. She
I'm not sure if y'all are expert whitters. Most people, real good whitters, they look up while they're whittling. Yeah, don't cut your finger off, though. Rutledge is one of the older houses, if not the oldest house in the city of Rutledge. Mr. Cabbage, if you don't care at this time, come in and tell us a little bit about this house.
Well, Ken, this house was built originally. You can see the slope of the roof. The roof, there is 4 rooms, and each room has a fireplace. And there was an outside porch all the way around the sides of the house. Now, the center portion of the house, where you can see the 4 windows, the upstairs and the downstairs, that was the main part of the house. Those rooms, one of them is approximately 16 by 22, and the other one is approximately 12 by 22. And upstairs and downstairs the same way. And they have the fireplaces in those rooms. The outside porches were all sloping out so that the water, when it rained, would run off of the porch. And when they boxed the house in to make it as big as it is today, they didn't change the slope of the floor. And if you'll look, you'll notice that the 2 side doors, that above the doors, that the glass and everything is slanted just like the floor. And all they did was just go through and box in on top of that and build in and encase the staircase.
Go.
The house also has an unusual trim, and all of this was sawn by hand, and there's no 2 of them that are exactly the same size. We've tried to replace some of them, and they're not interchangeable. Now, this did go all the way down the sides of the house, but when I bought the house, there was some of them that was messed up so much that we couldn't use them. And I get a lot of comments and a lot of people here that stop in to look at this trim and to take pictures of the house, which is unusual.
Yeah, it's a beautiful house.
The unusual thing about this house, and the windows in the front, if you'll notice at the bottom of those panels, there are two small doors. Now, those two doors will open back into the house. They are hinged. They have a latch in there that holds them into the floor, and you can open those and raise the lower panel of the window, and you have an entrance and an exit. I suppose that they used this when they had the porches around the house part of the time to enter and leave, but this is unusual, and I don't know exactly where the idea came from. Okay, I don't know exactly how old this house is. We had a gentleman to stop in here, it's been about 10 or 11 years ago, and he said that his grandfather fought in the Civil War and was at Bean Station when the war was over, and that his grandfather didn't have any money and was going back to Georgia and stopped here and started working for the man that owned this place, and ended up marrying his daughter. And I do know that we had an old deed that did have her name on the deed, and it was the name that this man told me that his great-grandmother's name was, maiden name.
That's very interesting.
So if that is right, this house was here before the Civil War anyway.
Okay, right. Jarnigan's Motor Company, and it's a pleasure to interview Mr. Bill Jarnigan. He's taking his time out today and going to help us a little bit on the history of Rutledge. And Mr. Jarnigan, if you'd like to, I'd like for you to tell us how old you are, sir.
Well, I'm 91 right now. Like about 4 months, 2 days, being 92.
Okay. I understand that you've been in the automobile business a long time, and I'd just like you to kind of feel free there and just go ahead and talk.
Yeah, around 70 years before this. I started in the car business, that is a mechanic in Knoxville, about 15, I guess, so I had a lot of experience there before I come up here.
I understand you used to operate and do a little dealings out of old Take Springs at Bean Station.
That's when we opened up around 17. Mr. John signed the contract for the motor at 16. We got our first car down in the south here, early 17, I guess around April 17. Then he got in touch with me, and I went up around with him and unloaded the first car with a T-model there, probably April 17. And we had never seen a car load set up, and I had to figure it all out how to get them unloaded and knocked down. We had to assemble them,
Right.
get them so we could drive them up to Take Spring Hotel there, wheels and things on, and then we had to finish assembling them after we got them up there.
You showed me the other day where you had a patent. I was watching a TV show where they'd interviewed you about that.
I got a patent on unloading down, bring the wheels, put them on. So we had to ship them, have them pre-shipped to Knoxville. We shipped them down there, we had a platform, I got a patent there, about 20 then, and sold a bunch of those trucks there for unloading to the dealers all over the country. And they worked out overnight, so 26, but then they started assembling them. That down with my
Down where you patent. Okay. Right. And to detail and tell us a little bit about what Rutledge looked like and what the businesses was back when you first started dealing around in this area, Mr. Jarnigan.
Well, see, we had a railroad through here then, what's called a feedline, Gardner Knoxville to Morristown. And that run up to 29 and 30. And then when they shipped about everything out, timber and everything, and then they pulled that speed line out, and then we were lost then with that railroad, you know. So we had to ship our cars to Knoxville. Before that, they on account of no platform to get unloaded.
Right.
So I sold business down here in the county then. It's lots of timber and growth out and everything that was hauled in here. Some of them used, some of them sold. Most of them early
was huge there.
Yeah, right.
The bark knocked off and flattened out. So there's been a lot of changes since then. Before then, through the city here now, that gives us more room for transportation.
Mm-hmm.
Made a lot of changes since 17.
You used to tell me about, you could remember down at the old jail there where they wasn't a bridge and people had to get across, I guess, the best way they knew how. It's probably a shallow area.
Oh, that old jail, yeah, they break out every week. They knock holes out around the chimney, get crowbars in there, and we got to weld all themselves back up. That time breaking out, just way down by itself, nobody guards it.
Uh-huh.
They're getting out all the time. You couldn't make it safe, or somebody didn't want to get out.
Right. You was one of the first people, I guess, to go in business here.
Well, there's stores here. Had a hardware store here and grocery store. Mr. Nancy's up there, had a garage up there. And before I come here, I worked out a week or two up around that garage there where the post office is now.
Uh-huh.
So they didn't stay there very long. Bob Henry was operating.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really appreciate you taking this time to help me here.
Well, anything I can do, I'll be glad to.
Well, I really appreciate that, and I'm sure that the people's going to enjoy seeing this, and we really appreciate you taking time out to help us on making this film, sir.
Well,
thank you very much.
Yeah, anytime I can give you any help, I know.
Appreciate it. Okay, I'm here in Rutledge today and have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. L.C. Bryant, a lifelong physician and resident of Rutledge, Tennessee. And Dr. Bryant, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like for you to tell us how old you are, sir.
I'll soon be 86 years old. I was born in 1901.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit about your boyhood days in Rutledge, how things was back then?
Well, when I was born here in Rutledge and spent my childhood here and went to school here, and back at that time our school, going to school in Rutledge, was a two-room school, and we lived a mile and a half from the school, and we walked to school every day. And there was no such thing as school buses and no public transportation or anything of that kind. And in the wintertime, the roads were bad because there was not any improved roads of any kind. It was just an old dirt road that got real muddy in the winter. You just walked through the mud. And it was, of course, sort of slow going. And the last part of my schooling here in Rutledge was they had just established a high school. That was the first year that there was any high school in Rutledge. That was in 1916, I believe.
Okay.
And then my family, we moved away from here. We moved over to Sevier County, and I went to school over there some, and I spent 1 year in high school up at Tusculum College in the prep department up there. And that's as far as my preliminary education was concerned.
I guess things changed a lot building wise, and I know they changed a lot in the things that y'all done, what we do today, but I guess the city of Rutledge changed a lot since those days.
Yes, it's changed a great deal. There are not too many buildings still standing in Rutledge. It was here during my childhood. The courthouse was destroyed by fire, and have a new courthouse that it's not new now, but it replaced the one that burned down years ago. And there are two of the churches, the Presbyterian Church and the Methodist Church, were here when I was a child. Methodist Church was built when I was about 5 years old, I guess.
Okay. Okay, I understand that you've practiced medicine a long time here in Granger County, and would you care to discuss a little bit how that got started and take it from there?
Well, I took my pre-medical education at Tusculum College and University of Tennessee. Then I went to Vanderbilt, entered the Vanderbilt Medical School in 23 probably, and graduated from Vanderbilt Medical School in 1927. And most of my classmates, after we graduated, went into internship and then on into residency and so on, but I did not. I came directly here to Rutledge and started practicing in the summer of 1927. The reason I did that, there were 2 or 3 reasons which caused me to do that. One was that I owed $6,000 on my education, which back in 1927, $6,000 was considerable money.
Yeah, it sure was.
And another thing was that the doctor who had been here doing the major practice here, Dr. Smither, a few months before that, he moved to Knoxville. And there was no doctor left here except Dr. Camel, who was then a real old man. And it looked like a good vacancy here for a practice. So that's why I came here. And I remember quite well the first call that I made when I came here. Back in those days, most of the medical practice in the country was at home, in the home, not in the doctor's office. People didn't come to the doctor's office. I'd been here a few days, and I was sitting in my office doing nothing, of course, and this rather old man came in the office and said, I'm looking for Dr. Bryan. And I said, well, I'm Dr. Bryan. And he said, well, I'm Bob McElhaney, and I want you to go see my wife just as quick as you can. And I said, all right, Mr. McElhaney, I can go right now. What do you think's wrong with your wife? And he said, well, I'll tell you, Doc, I think she's just dilapidated all over. Well, I went to see Miss McElhaney, and she wasn't in good health at all. But I doctored her the best I could, and about 10 months she got considerably better. And about 10 months after that, I delivered her of a healthy boy.
Number one, huh?
Which that was number one. And they named him Brian.
Oh, that's great.
Since then, I've had a whole lot of people named for me.
Right, that's great.
Some which I'm proud of, and some I'm not quite so proud of. And gradually, I got where I did more work. And developed over the years considerable obstetric practice. I delivered a lot of babies. In all, before I quit doing any obstetrics, several years, probably 12, 15 years ago, I had delivered more than 3,400 babies in all. And out of that bunch, I'm sure that 2,500 of them were delivered in the homes.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as I said several years ago, I stopped doing obstetrics and stopped doing any hospital work or surgical work at all.
Okay.
And just an office practice.
Mm-hmm.
And
I guess when you first started out, did you travel on horseback a lot, or buggies, or?
I never did. I never did own a horse to use in my practice, but we had no roads at all, no improved roads, and quite often I'd go as far as I could in my car, and they'd meet me with a horse, or sometimes a buggy, or a horse with a saddle on it,
Right.
Or a wagon, or something of that kind.
Right.
And a lot of times I just have to walk a half a mile or so to get there.
Okay, Dr. Brown, I understand that while you was practicing medicine here that you was involved in another business. Would you care to discuss that with us?
In 1936, I was forced into the telephone business. We'd never had good telephone service here, and the equipment and the lines had gotten in bad repair, and telephone service was very poor, and a great many people had quit trying to have telephone service. And in 1936, the thing came to a head when the central office and the switchboard were destroyed by fire and put us out of any telephones at all. And there was the closest telephone was in Jefferson City, and there was a small telephone system up at Bean Station, and we had no telephone service at all, and I couldn't hardly carry on my business without a telephone.
Right.
And I tried to get the Bell system to come in and take it over, and they were not interested at all. They refused to do anything. So I finally decided that I was just going to have to do it myself. So I bought the company that was burned out, had gone into bankruptcy. So I bought for a few $100s. I bought the Rutledge telephone company, and I bought a second-hand switchboard from the Aluminum Company of America. I went to Maryville and picked it up and brought it and had it installed in my in a part of my office, in my reception room, and we built some new lines and connected this thing up, and I started out in 1936 with 25 telephones on the system.
Right.
And after a few years, I began to build the thing up. It increased in number of subscribers, and then after quite a few years, well, right after the end of the Second World War,
Okay.
I bought a dial switchboard and replaced all of my telephones with dial telephones. We had a dial system. And several years after that, I had a good chance to sell the system, which I did. I got out of the telephone business, sold it to a company, and since then it has been sold two or three different times. It's been under different ownership several times and has grown to many times what it was when I sold it. In fact, when I sold it, I had about over 300 telephones on the system when I sold it. And then I got out of the telephone business, and I devoted all my time to practicing medicine since then.
Right. Well, I'd like to share this a little bit. I had the pleasure of being at Dr. Bryant's house a while back and seen a magazine. I don't think he much wanted me to put this in the movie, I guess because of his modesty, but I happened to look at an article that was in a national magazine where they wrote a big article praising a country doctor for doing what he done about a certain telephone company. And I'd like to take this opportunity, speaking as a citizen of Granger County, and thank you. And I think I can speak for all the people of Granger County for the many hours and many places and hard times and 3 o'clock morning calls that you've done. It must have been hard. And I'd like to say that on behalf of the people of Granger County.
Well, I think it was at the time that I bought and installed the dial switchboard and changed over to the dial system, that some of the newspapers got word of it, and it got publicized rather widely in several different magazines. they thought it was such an unusual thing that a doctor would have a telephone company. And we got an awful lot of publicity over the thing.
Okay, Dr. Bryant, in thinking about your past, I can't help but wonder, has anybody ever approached you with the question, you know, Dr. L.C. Bryant, if you had to do it all over again, what would it be like?
Well, I've been asked that question several times as to whether if I was starting all over or whether I would come to Rutledge and lead the kind of life that I have been through. And I've never had any idea, any notion at all that I would have rather done something else. I've been satisfied with my life here, and a lot of my classmates in medical school have become famous as doctors. Some of them have become wealthy and things of that kind, but I've made a good living. I'm satisfied with what I've accomplished, and if it's do over, well, I don't think that I would do it any way different.
Well, that's great. We appreciate you saying that. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for taking the time to share these memories with the people of Granger County. And the best thing that I can say is the people of Granger County really appreciate you. And I thank you very much for taking this time to sit and pull up a chair and talk with us.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we're visiting in Rutledge and privileged to have Miss Virginia Lady, and she's going to be talking to a guest that's been extremely nice and cooperative with us, and they're going to be talking about the history of Rutledge. And at this time, Miss Lady, if you would like to, I'd like for you to introduce the young lady we've got here and go ahead and talk a little bit about the history of Rutledge.
We're sitting on the lovely porch of the ancestral home of Mildred Marshall. And Mildred is going to give you a little of the background of this home of hers.
The land of which this residence is located was purchased in 1869, the month of June, from Mr. Warham Easley, Jr. The house was begun to be erected in the same year and was finished a number of years later. The property at that time included 148 acres and 29 homes. It was purchased by Dr. Joseph Huffmaster, a physician who resided in and practiced at that time in Rutledge, being one of the few physicians during the Civil War that was commissioned by both sides of the Army to administer to the physical needs of the soldiers in this area. Later, married Nancy B. Hudson of Union County, having formerly been married to Miss Tate, whose parents for a number of years resided and were proprietors of Tate Springs Hotel. Same circuit, and served in both capacities for 16 years each. Prior to the time, however, that he became judge, a lawyer and judge, he taught school for 1 year after graduating from Carson College in Madison Academy, where he originally met his wife-to-be, namely Mary Elizabeth Huffmaster. As time went by, he also was the originator of and president of the People's Bank of Rutledge. In this capacity, he served for some while. Married Olin R. Marshall of Barstown, November the 4th, 1914. There they resided for a number of years. To this union were born 2 sons, 2 children, Mildred Marshall and a twin, Macklin Marshall. Later was born to the union. He has become the 5th generation to reside in the homestead in Rutledge.
That's great.
Coming here after being born and reared in Rutledge, Bradenton, Florida, and then serving his country for a number of years abroad in World War II.
Okay.
Mildred's occupation was that of a teacher and guidance counselor, having served as the 2nd historian of Granger County, as GMAC. Read law under Mr. John Yo of Jefferson Postmaster became a physician here, practicing physician here. He added the first portion to be added, formulating his office within the residence. Then, as time passed, he established the first drugstore and apothecary shop here in Rutledge. It was located on the spot where the parking lot presently is that adjoins Dr. Brown and Dr. Hill's office.
Okay.
In turn, Dr. Joseph Huffmaster Campbell was named for Dr. Joseph Huffmaster and read medicine under him.
Okay.
Thus we see that the name was passed down through relatives for several generations. Now, with reference to the Presbyterian Church, the original structure of the Presbyterian Church had earlier served as the first courthouse in Rutledge, having been situated on the original, on the spot where the courthouse, by junction here in Rutledge between the courthouse and post office and the private drive up to the Marshall residence. As the new courthouse was built on the, as the second courthouse was built on the spot where the one now stands, the first courthouse was then abandoned and served for a period of while as the residence of the worshiping congregation of the Presbyterian Church, which is the oldest denomination in Rutledge, from which both the Methodist and Baptist denominations withdrew at intervals and formed their own denomination much later. After this new church had been erected to make a better access to the Marshall residence and Marshall Farm, then known as Richland Valley Farm and now as Glencrest, it was true that Judge Henderson, along with Dr. Huffmaster, gave the same portion of land from the front field that lies directly in front of the residence to the colored people of Rutledge, that there they might still continue their worship. Then it was that the new structure was built where it now stands in Rutledge. Because of their appreciation for what had been done for them, they gave it the name which is yet bears, Henderson Chapel.
When Mildred and I were little girls, you didn't jump in a car and go from here to there in Rutledge like you do now. You walked. And I grew up with the Bryans. My mother was a Bryan, and most of my younger years I lived with my grandmother Bryan and a maiden aunt and my mother on what later became known as Bryan's Curve, because it was noted after the automobile came into existence, it was noted for the many wrecks that we had there. But when Mildred and her mother and grandmother would decide to come to visit my people, they usually walked. It was about a mile, maybe a little more, but that didn't mean too much then. So they would walk down in the morning. You see, then you didn't just go for a few minutes. You went and spent the day.
Right.
So we would, they would come, and Grandmother Bryan would probably have some food prepared that sometime during the day we would eat. But mostly it was just talk. And then would sit on our front porch and rehash all of the events. And there were some social events then.
Right.
And Mildred and I, that didn't interest us so much. So I had a little tea set that someone had given me. Had the cups and the saucers and the little plates and the teapot. And we would get to pretend cakes and maybe some water in the teapot, and we'd slip around the corner of the house and set us out a little table. And we had a teapot.
Right.
And that was one of the events of our little lives at that time. And when we would walk up here, and we'd have pretty much the same type of entertainment here. And I feel that we certainly owe Mildred a vote of thanks for the time that she has given us today. We've been having a modern tea party with her,
Right.
as she
Right.
told us about her ancestral home. And I certainly appreciate it, and I'm sure that all the people who see the results will appreciate it.
Right. I'd like to take this time to really show my appreciation to her for giving us this time, and I really appreciate you doing this for school kids in the future and whoever is interested in keeping up with the history of Granger County. Thank you very much. Home that 5 generations is lived in, presently lived in by Miss Mildred Marshall, who's given her time today to talk to us. We appreciate that. We're here in Rutledge at the Elizabeth Naint's home, and she's lived here off and on for the past 58 years. And Miss Naint's, if you would, I'd like for you to tell me what the white building out there is, please.
That right building?
Right.
That white building out there is the left hand is the wash house, and the right hand is where they stored their, when they killed hogs, they brought their hams down here and hung them in that right hand. And explain how the wash house was fitted for washing, because that was a little unusual. Yes, there's a water in there, there's a piping in there for the water. And you had some big tubs, two iron tubs in there that are still there, built in. And there's fire in there, placed in there for the wash, to heat the kettle.
Now, Elizabeth, do you know, was that built by the Naintses, or was it already there when the Lowe's lived here?
It was here when I came to Virginia.
Okay, you said something about a garden in this area here.
It was here when I came here.
Now, tell him.
Because Good Daddy always hung his hams.
Tell him about Miss Naint's garden and how she worked in it.
Well, she had a beautiful garden out there. It was laid off purpose with stepping stones and all kinds of plants, flowers, raised flowers. She didn't raise the vegetables, she raised flowers. That was her pride and joy from year to year.
And she had beds that there was something in bloom all the time. The garden was never without flowers.
Right. I bet it's beautiful, wasn't it?
It was. And she would give them anybody that needed flowers or anything.
Right.
She always gave them.
Well, that's great. You said something about a barn being up where the post office is now?
Yes. It was a two-story barn then, and it was torn down when the post office was built.
It was really a carriage house.
Yes, because it had a barn.
I guess it's quite fancy then.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. Had a concrete floor.
This building here was my father purchased from the Southern Railroad. It used to be the old depot after they removed the railroad that ran from Knoxville to Morristown. He bought this building in 1925 and we converted it to what was called a funeral home. About all we had was an embalming room, a display room, and an office, because at that time practically all the bodies were taken home. This building here was owned by Roy Godwin. We bought it in 1952 and remodeled it and used it for a funeral home until it burned in 1972. Now it was remodeled to this building here. It burned in 1972.
Okay, I'm here in Rutledge, Tennessee today. Very much appreciative to have Mr. Lawrence Smith, who is a lifelong resident of Rutledge and has given his time to talk about the history of Rutledge and make this film more informational. Mr. Smith, if you don't care, I'd like for you to tell us how old you are and talk about your boyhood days there in Rutledge, Tennessee.
Okay, I was born in Rutledge in 1909, 77 years old. Had a good life here, enjoyed working with the people and helping them. Went to grammar school here and high school, went to Carson Newman College. In my junior year, I dropped out of Carson Newman, went to pharmacy school in Georgia, graduated there, passed the Tennessee Pharmaceutical Association examination for a licensed pharmacist. Went back to Carson Newman, received my BS degree. Been active in many civic affairs in the city, county. Operated the Smith Drug Store for many years. When my son became a pharmacist, gave the drug store to him. Still active in the funeral business since 1931. Have about 56 years in the funeral business, and have a very fine life. Raised 4 children, all of which are college graduates, and happily married. Have 7 grandchildren, and very successful with having a good family, church people.
Would you tell us how you got into your drugstore and funeral home business while here in Rutledge?
While I was in high school, Father made me work before school and after school, Saturdays and Sundays. In those days, money was very difficult to make, and during vacation time of college, had to work Saturdays and Sundays and nights. Then along in the 40s, we got involved in the ambulance business. We did ambulance work for 38 years, and after my father passed away, I took over both businesses and managed to operate the 2 of them while getting more help from time to time. The way my father got started in the funeral business was rather interesting. A man came here and went into the so-called undertaking business. All he did was sell caskets. He went broke. Dad took his caskets over and started selling them. And if there was a death in the community or out in the county, people would come in with a wagon, buy the casket. In those days they were called coffins. Some people call them squeeze heel coffins because they were narrow at the top and wide at the shoulders and real narrow at the bottom. They'd bring a cornstalk to measure the length of the casket, take it home and call in a minister and have a funeral the next day, and usually take it out behind the house and bury it. There was no embalming in those days, so there's been quite a lot of progress made in the funeral business since the early 30s. Back in the 30s, during the Depression, everything was real cheap. A lot of funerals would not run over $150, $200.
Okay.
I remember we sold bus tickets in the drugstore to Knoxville for $25. About the time I got out of college, there was not enough business here to support my father and myself, so I went to La Follette and went to work for $100 a month. And I remember getting a meal ticket over there in a restaurant for a week for $6.
Okay.
Eat a whole week for $6.
Be hard to do that now, wouldn't it?
That's right. It's rather interesting how much things have changed in my lifetime. But if I had all to do over, I'd like to do the same thing again.
Well, that's quite active in a lot of civic activities in the community as you spent your 70-something years here. And I also understand you got a great honor from Carson Newman College, which is an educational institution that you've helped a great deal through the years. And in 1982, you got a honorary doctorate degree, which was quite an honor. And I'm sure there's other civic activities that you've did while living here in Granger County. Would you like to talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, Carson Newman's been good to me. I felt it was a fine school. Served on the board for 18 years. Was chairman of the board for 1 year. They did give me an honorary degree, which I appreciate very much. And been active in about all the organizations in the town and the county. Oldest member of the church. It is he's been a member of the church the longest of any other member. President of the Lions Club 3 times. Only 2 of us left staff that are charter members of the Lions Club, Mr. Bill Jargon and myself. Clinch View apartment buildings, many things of that nature. It's been a real joy to try to get industry in the whole county. Most of the industries that are in the county, I helped in some way to get.
In summing this interview up, what has it meant to you to grow up and live in Rutledge, Tennessee?
I really believe it. A small town has a lot of advantages. Cities are so impersonal and difficult. Since I spent all my life in a small community, I'd still do it again, particularly in the funeral business. We know 98% at least of the people that we serve, and you feel a part of the family. You share with them their sorrow and grief, and makes you want to do all you can to help them. And the drug business the same way. We share their sicknesses and their good health. I would not swap a life in a small community for a life in a city. In the days of modern transportation, you can have the life of the country and be in the city within a matter of minutes almost. So I really think the small town life is the best.
Okay, I tell you, we really appreciate you taking time to do this, and I know it's going to be a lot of helpful information in this film for the people in the future that wants to look and see about the story of the history of Rutledge. Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. Churches are the Baptist Church.
Well, I think the Presbyterian Church has already been talked about, and maybe the Methodist. The Baptist Church was established or organized in April of 1892, and it had 18 charter members. The first building was built in 1896, but this building burned in 1921, and the present building was dedicated in 1926.
Okay, at this time, I would like for you to talk a little bit about the ladies' involvement in the history of Grainger County. We've not had anybody discuss that, and I think we need to do that. So if you'd like to talk about this a little bit, well, we'd be glad to hear it.
Okay, there's many women have served Grainger County well, especially as teachers, county officials, and women who've worked in church and civic organizations. But as far as serving in public, women were not allowed to vote until the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, in which women were allowed to vote. And since that time, in 1922, which was the first regular election after the ratification, 11 women have been elected to office in Grainger County. We've had one sheriff, 2 school superintendents, 1 register, 1 trustee, 1 county court clerk, and 3 circuit court clerks.
Okay.
Beulah Shaver, my mother, was the first woman elected to office in Grainger County. She was the first of 9 women elected to office in the state of Tennessee. She was elected in 1922 when she was only 21 years old. She served from 1922 to 1930. And I have a picture here of the Nashville banner in which it shows the 9 women who were elected to office in Tennessee, the first women who were elected. This is the Nashville banner that was issued on December the 17th, 1922. It shows the 9 women who were elected to office in the state of Tennessee. This was my mother, who was elected that year.
Okay, Mrs. Wilmark, I'd really like to take this time and opportunity to thank you for the time that you've put into this, getting this information together. And I'd also like to take this time on behalf of a lot of people in Granger County to mention your late husband, J.W. Wolfenbarger, who has given a lot of his time to help the people of Granger County. And I'd like to say from the people of Granger County that we give you a big thanks to both of you for the things that you've done for us. Thank you very much for this interview and for everything.
Thank you.
From its first years of settlement in the 1770s, East Tennessee was an isolated and primitive land. To the east, the rugged Appalachian Mountains separate East Tennessee from the coastal regions. To the west, the Cumberland Mountains form a wide barrier between East Tennessee and the rest of the state. Through the heart of the region runs the Tennessee River. But shoals in the river made it impossible in those early years to reach the outside world by water. Isolated from the world around them, East Tennesseans earned a reputation for independence and self-reliance, qualities personified in their great leader, John Sevier. also developed a knack for creating useful items of homemade technology, such as this turn lathe, this labor-saving cradle rocker, and this clever contraption for making rifled gun barrels were all products of early East Tennessee's inventive backwoods folk. East Tennessee's frontier era came to an end in the early 1800s. Other areas of the South began exporting cotton grown on large plantations worked by slaves. In the North, factories and cities appeared. New technology, canals and steamboats helped transform America in the early 1800s. But isolated East Tennessee was inhospitable country for canals and steamboats, and its hilly land was unsuitable for large plantations. Unable to follow either the southern or the northern path, East Tennessee remained an independent land of villages and small farms. But it did not remain completely isolated. East Tennessee's rugged mountains and tumbling rivers might stop canals and steamboats, but they could not keep out the greatest technological marvel of the 1800s, the railroad. East Tennesseans realized that the modern world was likely to pass their region by unless they took matters into their own hands. Many saw the steam locomotive as their salvation. Chief among them was Dr. J.G.M. Ramsey of Knoxville, a prominent physician and businessman. As early as the 1820s, Ramsey urged the construction of a railroad to tie East Tennessee to Atlantic seaboard cities such as Charleston, to open up the isolated region to trade and commerce. In the 1840s, the state legislature chartered several companies to build railroads in East Tennessee. These companies began laying track, and by 1860, railroads linked East Tennessee with Virginia, Atlanta, Nashville, Memphis, and other points far to the north, south, east, and west. The coming of the railroads did not make East Tennessee any less independent. When the Civil War came in 1861, most Tennesseans supported secession and took up arms against the North. But East Tennessee refused to join the secessionists. Following their outspoken leader, Andrew Johnson, most East Tennesseans remained stubbornly faithful to the Union. After the Civil War, East Tennesseans reaffirmed not only their independence, but also the tradition of inventiveness and ingenuity established by their frontier forebears. In 1877, for example, a young man in Hamlin County named Melville Merle designed and built this human-powered airplane which flapped its wings and actually flew before a crowd of astounded onlookers. Merle later patented his device, the first powered flying machine patented in the United States. A Greene County man, Edward C. Huffaker of Chuckey, became interested in the possibility of flight in the 1890s.
He was the first person to connect Bernoulli's principle, which deals with the flow of liquids or fluids, with the actual flight of birds. In 1893, after having built several models to test his theory of curved wings, he wrote a letter to Samuel P. Langley, who was the director of the Smithsonian Institute, Washington, D.C., entitled The Value of Curved Surfaces in Flight. Langley said in an answer to this letter that this was the first application of Bernoulli's principle to the theory of flight.
In 1895, Langley hired Huffaker as the director of the government-funded flying project at the Smithsonian.
In 1896, they flew a half-scale model, which was flown over the Potomac River, which at that time was the first successful flight of a powered model. It was powered by steam, about 2 horsepower. It flew for almost a mile. The flight was witnessed by Thomas Edison, who was astounded, but unfortunately couldn't get any details about how the thing was built.
In 1900, the early flight pioneer Octave Chanute commissioned Huffaker to build a glider, which they later took to Kitty Hawk. In the 1920s, far back in the hills of Granger County, a farmer named Enoch Houston Williams built an ingenious homemade telescope. He actually ground his own precision lenses for the telescope using glass from an old car windshield. On dark nights, he would watch the heavens for hours on end and could pick out deep craters on the moon invisible to the naked eye. Another Granger County man tackled a business problem with equal ingenuity. Bill R. Jarnigan was selling Model T Fords back in those days. The automobiles were delivered unassembled on railroad cars. So Jarnigan invented a device to unload the Model Ts.
I kept unloading these things where you get a little better, where you could unload them and get them assembled up a little quicker, and then it's too hard to work. So then I went to working on this truck here. I had figured it all out myself, didn't have no help, so I kept working on it. It took, well, I don't know, I guess I was a year over getting it perfected. After I built one, well, then I seen they was going to work, and then I had applied for a patent, got a patent, and had it manufactured by W.J. Savage there in Knoxville.
Bill Jarnigan's invention reflected East Tennessee's long-standing tradition of resourcefulness and ingenuity. But the Model Ts he sold signaled the coming of a new age to East Tennessee. The automobile could penetrate the most isolated coves and hollows, and even more than the railroad, it brought East Tennessee out of its long seclusion. In 1933, a new and powerful force for change arrived. Electric power generated by the Tennessee Valley Authority dams and steam plants broke down the isolation of East Tennessee in different ways. TVA's electricity brought with it not only electric lighting for farmers, it signaled the advent of the telephone, radio, and television, and it made possible large-scale industry. Many jobs were created. The spread of modern technology brought the region into the mainstream of modern urban industrial America. But East Tennesseans still retained their special tradition of inventiveness. With access to the outside world, and with the resources of modern transportation and manufacturing at their disposal, they brought their technological innovations to the attention of the whole country. Weston M. Fulton of Knoxville was a government meteorologist, mechanical engineer, and part-time instructor at the University of Tennessee. Fulton designed in the early 1900s a seamless metal tube which acted as a bellows when exposed to temperature variations. He called it a sylphin and organized a company to manufacture it. During World War I, the U.S. Navy used Fulton sylphin in its precision depth bombs. The Fulton Company eventually gained recognition as the largest in the world devoted exclusively to the manufacture of thermostatic devices. Today, it's the Fulton Sylphin division of Robert Shaw Controls. Outsiders began to take note of the region's wealth of natural resources and the enterprise of its people. These outsiders saw the region as a fertile field for new industry. Joining hands with progressive East Tennesseans, they helped transform the region. In the 20th century, East Tennessee became not only a
Hey, Mark? Yes.